In this module, we are going to discuss why sleep is important, its role in overall health, and how it impacts other aspects of health. Because sleep has very powerful impacts across the board with our health. And then, of course, we're going to discuss the consequences of poor sleep towards the end of this module. Now, some of this might be obvious for you. You might be all too aware of how you feel after continuous poor sleep. But I'm here to help you realise some of the lesser known areas as well and bring these to the forefront of your mind so we can address them and find solutions that work for your lifestyle. So why is sleep important? Sleep is important for rest, for recovery, and for rebuilding. So you can remember these in terms of the 3 R's. And when we talk about rebuilding, we mean rebuilding muscle, rebuilding cognitive pathways, rebuilding organs and cells. So essentially, everything that is super important in our bodies. And sleep is something that is talked about as a key aspect for athletes, as obviously rebuilding muscle and recovery for them is a top priority. But even for us as the more general population, just exercising on a habitual level, it's super important for our health to be resting, recovering, and rebuilding. This infographic on the right depicts the 4 pillars of health. And the 4 pillars of health literally refers to the cornerstones or the main contributing factors to supporting our overall health. And these factors all work together. So the 4 pillars are sleep, movement or exercise, of course nutrition, and then mental well-being or stress is sometimes referred to. And I really, really love this concept of the 4 pillars because it's super simple in the way that it completely removes the need to follow any fad diets or anything like that that is promoted as kind of a singular magic pill for our health. And the idea is that we can work on each one of these 4 pillars. Just small habits in each area is going to add up and it's going to help us to achieve an overall healthy, happy and sustainable lifestyle for our physical and mental health, which is what it's all about really, isn't it? And like I said, even working on one tiny aspect of each of these 4 really can add up to have a huge effect. Imagine if you ate 1 more piece of fruit every day, so that's your nutrition. Imagine if then you also went for an extra 10-minute walk per day, that's your movement. Then you may also do a 5-minute mindfulness practice or a meditation if you've got 5 minutes. And then finally you work on your sleep as well. Each are small behaviours on their own, but doing these things consistently can add up to have a huge impact, and they would all complement each other because like I mentioned before, all of these 4 pillars interlink and affect each other. So this example that you can see here, poor sleep increases the levels of your hunger and stress hormones. So your hunger hormone is called ghrelin and your stress hormone is called cortisol. And consequently, you may eat more and feel anxious the next day. So we can see how all 4 pillars are influenced and interact here. And I think it's super aware to be important of this concept of the 4 pillars because it can provide context and clarity and understanding of why you may feel and act certain ways and carry out certain behaviours after poor sleep, rather than just feeling completely random and like you have no control over your appetite or your stress levels. So let's talk about some of the consequences of poor sleep. Now we have psychological and physiological consequences. I've separated these into the 2 columns for some clarity. But honestly, because everything in our body links together so closely, I think it can be hard to separate some of these. But let's go through them. So emotional or psychological or mental consequences of poor sleep. We've got impaired focus, short patience, increased irritability, low mood, poor food choices, lack of motivation, and forgetfulness. So you'll probably feel like there's some overlap here. Take a moment now and think how many of these you can relate to, and how many of these do you know for a fact that you suffer from the next day after poor sleep? Are there any that maybe you haven't linked with poor sleep before, but when you actually think about it now, you're like, yeah, actually, I am really short and impatient with my partner or my colleagues when I'm tired. And then on this right-hand side, we've got the physical consequences. So let's think about these physical consequences of poor sleep now. So firstly, we've got impaired skill acquisition. This is obviously an important one for athletes for sure. It may mean that they struggle to carry out tactical drills or skills in training due to being tired. But also for us at work, maybe we are slower to understand a key concept, or our hand-eye coordination is just off. One of those days where you become super clumsy and just bump into every door frame. And then increased inflammation as well. So inflammation is something that underlies chronic disease in our body. So this can be a huge factor in detrimenting our health long term. Inflammation underlies cardiovascular disease. It can affect your risk of strokes, Alzheimer's, lots of chronic diseases like that. Inflammation is a key factor. Increased risk of injury, again, key for athletes, but also if we're playing sport with our friends or training in the gym, it's just easier to pull a muscle. And then lower pain threshold as well. Impaired insulin signaling. So this results in impaired glucose metabolism, which causes you to feel tired as your body can't efficiently burn its main fuel source. So our bodies primarily burn carbohydrates. That is, carbohydrates are our brains and our muscles' favorite source of fuel or energy. And carbohydrates break down into glucose in the body and provide us with energy. But after poor sleep, this process of breaking carbohydrates down into glucose for energy is very much more inefficient. Increased risk of cardiovascular disease. This is likely due to impaired glucose metabolism, as we just talked about, and also due to increased inflammation, which we talked about earlier as well, because of course cardiovascular disease is a chronic illness. Slow recovery. So obviously this can refer to slow recovery from exercise. Maybe you feel more DOMS or muscle soreness. But also slow recovery maybe after a night out. If you've had a few drinks, your body doesn't deal with that hangover as well. Or just simply being ill. Maybe you don't bounce back from having a cold as easily because your body just isn't optimally equipped to deal with that additional stress because you're getting poor sleep. Increased hunger and appetite. So as we mentioned before, poor sleep increases our hunger hormone called ghrelin. And then finally, lower testosterone, which impacts on muscle mass, it impacts bone health and also sex drive. So that is a huge spectrum of influence on your health when we look at the mental and physical consequences of poor sleep. It covers so many different feelings and behaviours throughout your day. So hopefully this slide puts into perspective for you how key sleep is and therefore how important it is that we take care of it. So let's think what this looks like in sequence in a day-to-day real life scenario. And as I'm going through these, I want you to have a think about how many you can relate to and recognise in your own life. So this first example, if you eat a heavy meal for dinner, that can cause you to have poor sleep because your digestive system is still very much up and running and it can't shut down properly because you're digesting that food. So that means your body can't go into that deep sleep and give you the good rest that you need. So then you have a poor sleep, you wake up the next day, maybe you're lacking motivation because you're just tired and sluggish. Maybe this means that you don't exercise. And if you don't exercise, then maybe that means that you eat more calories than you burn that day. And that puts you in a calorie surplus, which we know that if that's sustained over time, that will lead to weight gain. So the second example, maybe you have a few drinks, a few beers, glass of wine. This can also lead to poor sleep, as nice as it is. It can lead to poor sleep. The next day, maybe you have increased appetite. And increased appetite can mean that you eat more than required, or maybe you want to eat junk foods. I think we can all relate to when we're feeling hungover, maybe ordering a McDonald's, just fancying some fries or some junk food. This can obviously also result in a calorie surplus. and again, if sustained over time, lead to weight gain. So hopefully what you can see here is none of these things in isolation are necessarily a bad thing. Not exercising on one day is not a bad thing. Obviously, we need rest days. Eating junk foods, there's a place for that. You need to include your favorite foods in your diet so that you can enjoy a healthy and sustainable lifestyle. But the point is, if these habits are continuous, if they're more days than not, then if sustained over time, these factors obviously all link together, and that's when we have the negative consequences. This third example, so increased work stress, which I'm sure many of you can relate to at one point or another. This can lead to poor sleep, obviously. Maybe the next day you wake up, you're super tired, and you think, oh, just get me a coffee. You drink more caffeine than maybe you normally do. That can lead us to feel more anxious. And then again, that night, you'll probably have a poor sleep again. So we really are going around in a cycle there. And this last example, late night exercise. So this is a tough one because exercising is obviously a super healthy habit, something that we should all be striving to include in our lifestyles. But, with busy, stressful life, if you've got families, if you're out at work, that can mean that you're exercising later than maybe you would like in the evening. Maybe you have to eat dinner after that for, practicalities. You don't want to eat dinner before because it can cause you to feel heavy, you get a stitch. So you exercise fairly late, that means you eat dinner fairly late. That keeps your digestive system working, so you get a poor sleep. The next day, that can lead you to feel irritable and have poor focus at work. So which of these do you feel like applies to you? If there's any that really, really jump out to you, or you've thought of your own example, I would really suggest write it down and make a note of them. Because when we put pen to paper with habits like these, we immediately become a lot more conscious of them, and we bring them out of our subconscious brain, which means we are a lot more likely to act on them and make improvements, and of course boost our overall health. So for anyone that is feeling overwhelmed right now, please don't be. It sounds like a lot because we are talking about 4 different important factors in our health. But if you can, switch your mindset and see this as an incredible opportunity. We have 4 factors here which are within our control that we can improve to make ourselves feel better and actually be better for long-term health and enjoyment of the rest of our lives. The 4 pillars of health are all modifiable factors. We can optimize our nutrition, we can optimize our sleep, and we can combine these factors to feel great. We have control over our own health, so let's learn how to optimize it. And this absolutely isn't something that we do all at once. This is a very gradual process. And thank you so much for joining this Sleep and Nutrition Masterclass. That is a significant part of this process, that you're now going to be more educated and more empowered to have control and optimize these elements of your health. It's very much, in my opinion, a lifetime of gradually improving our habits. And this is a process that I've seen many people learn to love, and it's actually not a chore in the end. It's a luxury to have this control over our health and be able to improve ourselves. So please sit with these ideas that we've talked about so far. Think about which consequences of poor sleep resonate with you the most, and which affect your day-to-day life the most. And then join me in the next module. Join me for module 2, talking about nutrition strategies to optimize our health.